Conversations with Elders, hosted by yours truly, Louis-Virie Blanche, welcoming you to Glastonbury Radio 432, where we will be TED Talking in tongues with the elders of all ages, all generations, all races, cultures, and creeds. All gender, religious, or political preferences will be honored and encouraged on Glastonbury Radio 432, Conversations with Elders, where it is our treasured pleasure to roll out the red carpet of golden liquid love light to you in honor of the Queendom Come, soul dancing free to life's heartbeat drum, in honor of mother, daughter, sister, lover, priestess, goddess, friend, sharing the blessings of love's perfect stranger, Deja Vu, welcoming you to Glastonbury Radio 432.
It's too cosmic, much too cosmic for me. Much too cosmic.
Aloha, hola, aho, hello. High five, brother. Dr. Mohsen is here. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. Good for you. Thank you for being with us again.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we are going to continue with laughter, color, light, and sound. And tonight we're going to start with discussion of field and flow. And then we'll go into the quality of light. So in terms of field and flow, let's refresh our listeners with what that means.
Yeah. You know, what happens, all functions in creation is magnetic. It is that magnetic that sometimes, when it comes to our feeling, we call it emotion or emotion. And that's why the whole universe is created on three very major primary principles. The first one is emotion. That means all biological or human, animal, species, they have emotion. That means a magnetic attraction toward each other. So emotion, is just means, the function of the magnetic field. Now, the next primary principle is recursion. That means, all biological entity in creation, they produce of their own kind.
Producing of their own kind.
Yeah, with a seed of wheat becomes 70 seeds of grain of wheat. And we put corn, it becomes 700 of corn. It's some kind of relative magnitude. But
they divide and multiply.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, they divide to multiply, because when you divide, you multiply. And the thing is, when you put, there is an instinct in that wheat, that when you put a seed of wheat in the ground, it doesn't produce corn. You put corn, it doesn't produce wheat, it produces corn. There's no sex change. Yeah, so anytime we have a field, it produces a flow. For example, the seed of love is sowed by, let's say, a female, usually in the nature, but it's cultivated by male. So all of a sudden, one creates a field, and that field, it induces a flow. And if there is a flow, induces a field. See, you go back and forth. It's like a seasons. So anytime we have a magnetic field, we have a flow of magnetism. And such as, the sun has a strong magnetism around it. So that magnetism, it creates a flow of magnetism, which we call that synergy. Or part of that synergy, that the full spectrum of vibration, one hair of that, you see it as synergy or light. But the spectrum of the magnetism of the sun is not just the light, it's other things. It's take, Earth, turn around itself, rotate around the sun, and the whole love affair between Earth and sun.
So the process is really synergy and syntropic becomes centropic.
Yeah, entropy meaning ever increasing order.
Ever increasing order.
In creation, we have field and flow, which is the function of magnetism. In physics and science, they have action and reaction. action and reaction has to be governed by equivocation, which doesn't exist in nature. So this action and reaction, it cancels each other. But field and flow, it causes recursion. And recursion is in the also polarity, because in creation we have polarity, which is male and female. In science we have positive and negative, again, it's cancellation. So that's why field and flow, when we really get into the realm of field and flow, we are becoming synchronized with nature and creation. Not by the physical law that I created, that I sometimes, some years later, I myself regret, because I find I was wrong, because it was based on asomeness rather than assurance.
And so, in order to make sure we're assimilating and not accumulating and maintaining
Yes.
an alkalinity,
Yes,
we don't rely on human systems, but we follow natural functions.
exactly. Thank you.
Well, you have been inputting, the intake of this inspiration is coming out now. I'm my field
Yeah,
and flow of understanding.
yeah. And see, the thing is, it's not inclusive, or it's not inclusive, or it's inclusive in all living things. It's whether me or you, or a plant or human, or animal, or whatever we are subject to this field and flow. You're subject to polarity. You're subject to recursion. You're subject to immutation. So that happens all in field and flow. When we have a field, it induces a flow. When we have a flow, it induces a field around itself.
So when people speak of or think of the unified field of consciousness,
Yes.
that unified field is a field of field and flow.
Yeah. Yeah. That consciousness that you just mentioned, it's a very good reason to mention it here, because when it's all conscious and not subconscious, there is no obstruction in the field and flow. There is no resistance. It all flows autonomically.
Well, when people accumulate emotions, the
Yes.
accumulation of emotion, the way that I think we're understanding the way that works is it gets submerged in the subconsciousness.
Yes.
And trauma that people are don't want to consciously face, it gets suppressed
Yes.
into the subconsciousness.
Yeah.
And you may have something happen in childhood that when you're in your 20s or 30s, it starts wanting you to
Yeah.
utilize your consciousness to assimilate it.
Yeah. It's kind of started spelling out. So that's why negative emotions, it's very accumulative, because by conscious act of being or existential consciousness, jealousy is not assimilative by the true nature of human. Greed is not assimilative. Hoarding is not assimilative. Aggression is not assimilative. It's accumulative. No matter how you throw the rice, that negative emotion is always accumulative, because it doesn't assimilate in the true nature of human being. It doesn't assimilate in the true nature of animals, or let's say the trees and the plants. So you don't see those negative emotion among them.
Now,
So
if people are sensitive enough, they go into a room or a building that has fluorescent lights compared to natural lights. They should sense an accumulation that is not feeling harmonious to their inner
yeah,
senses.
what happened, that brings us to the whole notion of difference between oscillation and vibration. The vibratory light, because the vibration of sun has a spectrum, and that spectrum, part of that spectrum is light. There is a magnetic spectrum of the sun that does all kind of function. One of those, the strike of the part of that spectrum, is light. So that light is vibratory. The fluorescent light is oscillatory. So and also sometimes it's fragmented spectrum. The brain, the pituitary gland, needs to see through the iris of the eye we need to see full spectrum of the light for pituitary gland to function in a healthy way. So fluorescent light, since it doesn't have that, and it doesn't have that vibratory attributes, it doesn't do well with the pituitary gland. And if it's fragmented the spectrum, that's even worse. And that's the work of Dr. John Ott.
Yes, John Ott. So
Yeah.
let's go to that list of those principles pertaining to the quality of light.
Okay, let's say if you go to, now if you look at the slide number 26, you notice there is a spectrum of the light as it goes from the red all the way to violet.
Mm-hmm.
You see, as it goes to the violet, it becomes shorter wavelength. That means more, it's more energetic. So as now, if you look at a, electromagnetic wave, it
Mm-hmm.
has two components. One of them is magnetic field. The other one is electric field. This is the slide number 27. In oscillatory context, electric is always vertical component,
Right, right.
and the magnetic is horizontal. Now, if we go to slide number 29, you notice in cosmic or natural magnetism, the electromagnetic field, magnetic field is vertical and electrical is horizontal. It's exactly opposite.
Mm-hmm.
You see that?
Yes.
So that's why oscillation is not friend of vibration. That's why we define it as electromagnetic field or pollution. That it's the biggest pollution we have today, EMF,
EMF. Mm-hmm.
such as from Wi-Fi or such as from cell phone and transmission lines or substation. There's very high level of magnetism. Oscillatory magnetism. So you notice the nature of these two things from oscillation to vibration is quite opposite of each other. So that brings us to whole slide number 30. What is the quality of light? So there is a natural or biological versus mechanical or optical. So mechanical light that comes from, let's say, through a transmission line is oscillatory. The light that comes from the sun is vibrational. So that's why, we have daylight spectrum versus light bulb spectrum, two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have full vibration spectrum from the sun, unless we have damaged the ozone layers or certain things like that. But in general, we have full vibrational spectrum when in mechanical lights or mechanical oscillatory light, at best we have full visible spectrum. We don't have the visible spectrum. That means sun beside visible spectrum, it has other part of the spectrum which is necessary for human body, for the growth of the plants. So that's why natural light is the qualitative spectrum. Oscillatory light is more like quantitative spectrum. So that becomes essential light that's necessary for the growth of health of the human, health of the plants and animals, and the whole sustainability of the ecosystem versus simulated light, which is oscillatory. So these are a little differences. We have to make a distinction. So when we come to healing lights and healing gels, so we know how to apply those to hopefully induce some healing.
And you want full spectrum light.
Yes.
So, if you're working or living in an environment that doesn't have a lot of windows to let natural light in, and you're living under fluorescent lights for hours and hours every day,
Yeah.
you're going to accumulate entropy from those types of experiences, right?
Yes. Oscillatory entropy.
Oscillatory entropy.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a classroom where students are wanting to learn, that environment, if these considerations are applied to the environment is going to be more productive for those that are doing
Yeah,
anything in that realm.
yeah, sense of fatigue, and also lack of interest and all the other issues of the emotional stuff, under natural light is totally different than under fluorescent light.
Now, what would have possessed, I mean, the fluorescent light came along for, what was the justification of that? Just another consumer item, another new way of producing light that didn't serve to.
Well, I mean, and now the next step to that is LED. Now, if you look at the market, is full of LED lights
Mm-hmm.
because the consumption of electricity is less. But that doesn't, it's like a GMO product, GMO light. Is it healthier?
So the LED is really akin to GMO light.
Yeah, I mean, something like that. Yeah. But the consumption is less, so we save energy, which we all usually pay for it, but we pay the health bill somewhere else. I mean, then we pay replace it with we have more health issues.
So we have the idea that we're going to create a better system of light, and it's nowhere near better for us at all. It's actually what we've called a convenient misunderstanding or convenient
Yeah, yeah, it's entropical conveniences.
entropical conveniences of the modern day life.
That's why I said one of them is quantitative and the other one is qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
The natural light has a qualitative spectrum. This has a quantitative. That means you pay less money for it with an LED light than you do incandescent. But if you have to do healing light healing, you have to use incandescent full spectrum, which is closer to natural light than fluorescent or LEDs.
So our fruits and vegetables that are nourished in the sun and in nature, we've been talking about the proximity of when you get the orange or the apple or the tomato or the cucumber out of off the plant. The sooner you consume it, the more benefit you're going to
Yes,
gain from the consumption of that fruit or vegetable.
yes, because that's why we don't. Nobody has to listen to you or me. All they have to do, look at the birds. They don't touch the fruit until it's ripe.
Yes.
And then if it falls on the ground, they don't. They're picky. They don't eat the one on the floor. They want from the top of the tree.
Yes.
But human takes it and in about a week later, put it on the grocery shelf because there is a transition period to get it from here to there because there is no other way to do it.
Now, sunglasses, often there are a lot of options for people to buy. There's this, the idea of looking through rose-colored glasses, but a
Yeah,
lot of places sell glasses now, sunglasses in different colors.
yeah. I mean, there is also full spectrum, which is a little bit better, but sunglasses, it really uh, there are sunglasses which is full spectrum that John Ott, actually recommended.
And protection from the UV, is this a consideration that follows in harmony with what we're discussing?
Yes, but what happened? The reason that there is excessive UV because we used a lot of CFC gases like Freon in the old days. Now, back in mid 90s, I made a lot of ordinances, that it banned the use of CFC in, let's say, city of San Jose, which was uh, one of the first cities that started to do that because Freon, or when it gets into the atmosphere, it destroys the ozone layer.
And Freon was used in air conditioning systems.
Yeah, and then it was called CFC 12, and then they now Mercedes was the first company that came with CFC 131, I think, or 133, or I forgot the number. That was the detrimental effect was about 1/10, but still, any refrigerating gases, which we refer to as chlorofluorocarbons, it destroys the ozone layer. That's why in my building design, I do not use air conditioning system. You do passive solar design, that it's heated and cooled naturally. Because the minute I put a mechanical system, I used to have a freon gas in it.
So if the natural field and flow of the building, the solar texture, solar architecture is your way
Yeah,
of
so
describing your work.
Yeah. So architecture is to really absence of mechanical system, because my definition is mechanical system in the building is presentation of failure in design. Because if the design was not a failure, it was a fully passive solar design, it would not need a mechanical system. So again, mechanical system in a building is indication and manifestation of failure in passive solar design.
And the process of in our homes, in our schools, hospitals, this is the paradigm shift that we want to inspire,
Yeah.
these understandings.
Yeah, I mean, 100 years ago, there were homes, if you look at, let's say, primitive cultures, that's even in natives in America, they all had passive solar homes. And then there was a way, their walls was different. Their material was different, because the material had the ability to store heat and release it at a later time. And that was called the time lag of the walls. So I have walls, for example, that it takes 12 hours for the heat to come in and the cool to come in. So therefore, you stabilize the temperature variation. So the heat of the 2 o'clock in the afternoon, let's say, comes 2 o'clock in the morning, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, when there's very cool, the heat is delivered to the inside.
I lived in a rammed earth home and the walls were 4 feet thick.
Yes.
And that's the principle that design is concentrated upon.
Yeah, see, what happens is something called attenuation, which Earth does to us. Attenuation means fluctuation of temperature. Let's say your extreme case in a desert, it goes between, let's say, 90 or 100 during the day and about 40 at night. So that fluctuation of temperature, when you have a rammed Earth, or when you have a wall with a time lag, or attenuation, that fluctuation of temperature, which is really high and low, it becomes very narrow. It becomes, let's say, I designed between 65 to 80. And 65, 80 is very tolerable temperature for human comfort. So it is possible to do a wall that takes the fluctuation of temperature and dampen it, which is called attenuation, to a fluctuation which is within human comfort zone.
So as we pursue these discussions, people will get practical knowledge that they can apply to actually benefit themselves with the understandings and application of synergy and syntropic.
Yes.
In the residences, in our businesses, in our schools, and in our everywhere we dwell.
Yes. Well, I mean, all we have to do, we are not reinventing the wheel. What happens, the passive solar design, basically in a different style and different version, was in all different cultures in the past. And that's how people, heated and cooled their homes. But all of a sudden, mechanical system came in, because all of a sudden centralizes the energy application. So if it centralizes with me, I benefit from that.
Now, are there any materials that are supportive of these concepts that are now available that weren't readily available in the past, like for instance, aircrete?
Well, I mean, anything, when we talk about passive solar design or passive solar light, there is three principles. The primary principle first is collection. So how do I do a building that it collect maximum in winter and minimum in summer? For example, if I have a building which is, let's say 50 by 20, and the 50 side is facing south, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I have a piece of paper I can show you. And the long side is facing south.
Mm-hmm.
That building, this is a very basic, outline. When the long side is facing south and the short side is facing east and west, the building of that nature collects more solar energy in winter and less in summer. But if I
Oh.
turn that building 90 degrees, that the long side is facing east and west, and the short side is facing south, that building may use 2 to 3 times more energy than the other one because it collects minimum energy or synergy from the sun in winter when I need it, and it collects maximum in summer. So just turning this 30 by 50 building, all of a sudden, if I turn it 90 degrees in the wrong orientation, I all of a sudden increase the consumption of that house by 2 to 3 times, especially in cooling.
So these considerations help to maintain a positive field and is it positive or say harmonious field and flow?
Yes.
And we've talked about harvesting vibration. These are the means by which we harvest vibration.
And then the next thing, so this is just the first principle is collection. How do we do the physiometry of the building that collects maximum in winter time and minimum in summertime? Right? Now, the next thing is the storage. This was a collection. So we are making a shape that collects maximum synergy in winter and minimum in summer. Now, we want material that when it collects, it can store it. So when it stores it, and then, we have to determine how long would it take for this wall to release it. So it's collection, the storage, and release. But that really, the release is based on the factor called time lag. Time lag means how long it takes for the heat of, let's say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning. 12 hours, but should I put it at 10 hours or should I put it at 14? So the thickness of the wall determines how long the heat will be delivered, released into the inside.
So it wasn't necessarily an arbitrary decision for a rammed earth home to have 4-foot thick walls.
Yeah, I mean, these people, they knew it by heart.
And the ancient cultures, native cultures in the a lot of areas of the world, that's what those ancient civilizations were using.
Yeah. And now what happens, some of these people were genius architects. Now this mass wall that you have, I have very similar walls. I made it in, I have made so many of these walls in Utah and also in Texas. Now, if this wall, inside of it has a cavity, so from outside, which is hot, it's trying to come to the inside to heat it up. Now, that cavity inside can also get heated and the airflow circulates inside.
It creates a motion.
Yeah. So there's all kind of, when we have the primary principle, then we can use it for radiative heat. That means radiation from the material. So we need to choose material that's very good radiative. We cannot insulate a wall like that. Insulation is backward. It's it's totally against the passive solar. I never put insulation in any of my buildings. Now the next thing is the material have to have higher storage capacity. For example, if you take Glover salt, has highest amount of storage in the nature. That's why in cold places, which is really black icing in the road, mix it with the sand and put it on what? On the road, so it doesn't freeze. Now, it has a very miraculous attribute that within, if they can do it with a few um, additive, it can it can uh, it can congeal and coagulate or freeze or become solidified. That Glover salt at about 65 degrees when it's called phase change. When it solidifies, it gives a lot of heat. So at 65, 60 degrees, this salt is giving a lot of heat. At about 80 degrees, it liquefies. So when it liquefies, just like refrigerator, it absorbs a lot of heat. So it keeps us between 65 to 80 degree temperature. Now, if you look at cliff dwellers, natives even in America, they used to put these salts inside their adobe walls.
They mixed it with the earth.
Yeah, so I have done, let's say, homes in Texas, which inside the walls, it's all Glover salt, no insulation. And these homes, they stay between 65, 80 degrees. Yeah.
So when people describe someone as being the salt of the earth, that's a compliment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I mentioned maybe a couple of times ago, there was a town, it's what's called Tagaza in Africa. It was the center of civilization. And the backing of the money was not gold, it was salt, because they had the highest quality of salt. And then there's a next to it, I think south, about 37 miles, it was the city of Timbuktu that everybody makes fun out of. But it was those towns, were center of civilization. And what happened, they had a lot of knowledge of what salt can do. There's a salt city that archaeologists, they just have found in that area, which was built with salt rocks.
Now, is that what took you to Utah? There's the salt flats. Utah has a distinction of salt, does it not?
Salt Lake. Yeah. Yeah. That salt is not Glover salt. It's a little different. But it's good. Any salt, has a good, but Glover salt, which is sodium sulfate, has that attribute. It's called Glover, Glauber, Glover salt.
Glover salt, Glauber.
And colder climate, you notice the bottom of all cars are rusted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this process we have process, procedure, and practice.
Yes.
So when we look at the quality of light in our homes and where we spend a lot of time, focusing on the vibrational,
yes,
not the oscillation, was something you said that John Ott was central to this understanding?
Yes, his lifetime work was on, there's many books that he has, if you look at, for example, Health and Light.
Health and Light.
Yeah. Secret Life of Light.
He had a book called Secret Life of Light.
Yes, and then his many books, on lights. So any of them, if you put John Ott, you may get it on Amazon. I have several of them here. Yeah.
And the Let There Be Light, we've spoken about that. Who was that book by?
That is by Dinshaw. Dinshaw was the one who, in the early 1900s, worked on lights very similar to Rife. The lights that actually has decimating effect to germs and viruses. That's why he was able to come up with the charts and a combination of lights, combining from 9 lights, that you can get almost all the frequencies of lights. So therefore, he was able to do a lot of healing with lights. Light healing is probably, in this century, he was the founding member of that.
Jinshaw.
Yeah.
Let There Be Light by Jinsaw. And then John Ott's writings were Healing Light?
The Health and Light.
Health and Light.
That's his best, most famous book, yeah.
And so these understandings would increase the strength of our immune systems, would they not?
Yes, because what happened, you notice, in his book, you see that sometimes the clothes that you are wearing, it may have bad effect. Let's say synthetic clothes versus cotton clothes. Or even he has a picture in his book where people wear these partial spectrum sunglasses. All of a sudden, when you do muscle testing, the muscle strength drops.
Applied kinesiology.
Yeah. But he didn't have much, not that many friends. He had a lot of enemies, but he was a founding member of Health and Light. And when it comes to our building, it's very important because the material we are using in modern architecture, it has a lot of off-gassing. Okay, now this off-gassing, that's why number 5 in the list of risk to public health. Number 1 is alcoholism. Number 2 is the smoking. I'm sorry, number 1 is the smoking. Number 2 is alcoholism. Number 3 is highway fatality. And then it's homicide. Number 5 in terms of risk to public health is indoor air quality.
Indoor air quality is number 5. Now go through that list again. The first being
smoking.
Smoking.
Any kind of a smoking. And then, alcohol.
Intake of alcohol.
Yeah, yeah. And then, highway fatality.
I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Like highway accident that people get in car accident.
Okay.
Mechanical accident and all that.
Yes.
Highway fatality, which takes about almost 65,000 people a year. And then the 4th is homicide. After that is indoor air quality. These are called by Department of Energy. So back in 90s and early 2000, it was called risk to public health. I have a whole presentation on that. If you want, we can maybe focus on that sometime.
There's a lot of discussions now because kids are staying home and under lockdown and there's homeschooling, but before the schools are really suitable to have them return, the air quality in the schools has to be given very concentrated consideration.
Yeah, there's many studies, in the schools, in Sweden, that you notice the effect of fluorescent light, Wi-Fi. It was very detrimental on the kids. I mean, they would be fatigued, they didn't have interest, it was hard to handle them. So in some of these countries, they have already taken the Wi-Fi out of the schools.
Well, there's a concern now. More and more people are getting concerned about how much activity our children are putting into these devices. I mean, I know people that have teenagers that sleep with their phone under their pillow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the worst place, to have your cell phone near your bed when you go to sleep, because your vibration drops to very lowest, which is alpha or maybe theta, which is the lowest almost. And then here, there's something like 1 billion hertz right next to your bed. And so this is not very good, especially when you're asleep and if your cell phone is near your bed or you're using your cell phone in the car.
Well, I know of someone that fell asleep on their cell phone and actually had an effect on their face. When they woke up, it was swollen and discolored.
There's a very accurate researcher by the name of Dr. Nick Bigich from Alaska. He has written a few books. One of them is called Angels Don't Play This Harp.
Yes. Dr. Flanagan wrote the foreword to that book.
Yeah. So what happens, there is a lot of, he has said, the amount of electromagnetic hazard that we have is not 10 times, 20 times, 30 times more than permissible rate. is 250,000 times more.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if these kids are all using the cell phone and that's their way of their socializing, and it's a virtual and social medias and all that stuff, it's very scary.
Well, I don't remember the title of the movie, but I've been talking to people that have children, and some people are now limiting the use of their children's use of these devices because of the understanding of this detriment is growing.
Yeah, it's now they keep advertising 5G, and
Right.
that's, I mean, there are pictures that on the internet. If you put these bones two sides of an egg within less than 55 minutes, it can become hard boiled egg.
And how does this happen?
When you put two sides of an egg, I'll send you the picture. It
Really?
makes
And it will create a hard boiled egg in how long? Less than an hour?
55 minutes.
Wow.
And same thing here, hard boiled brain.
Right.
You can't call them egghead.
Well, the nautilus shell that we find at the beach.
Yes,
When you find those, I think abalone comes out of them, right?
yes.
Well, when I'm in Jamaica, I find two beautiful nautilus shells and I put them over my ears because you
Yes,
listen, you hear the ocean in there, right?
yeah.
I don't know why is that? How is that spiraling effect?
It's got a perfect vortation. You see, it goes like this, and it has peristalsis.
So you're listening to a vortex.
Yeah, you are you are you have rotation because something rotates in it. It rotates, and it has peristalsis.
Well, I put them up and I say, look, the first set of headphones.
Yeah. So that's why I have been mentioning, friends don't call friends on their cell phone. The other one, I had bumper sticker says, "Get rid of your cell phone before your cell phone gets rid of you."
Oh my goodness. Well, you have a very unique lifestyle. You may be the only person, only a handful of you exist. You don't
Yeah.
use a cell phone and you don't have a television, right?
No.
Two of the most major modern conveniences. You're really not with it.
Yeah, it's because what it does, it's it's called to the television. That means it tells you what your vision to be.
Yes. Well, when I travel outside the US, where, everywhere you go in certain people's lives, you go everywhere, there's a television in the environment, whether in the home. I mean, I go to some people's homes, and even when no one's in the room, they have the television on.
It's uh, it's so distracting because it's a waste of time.
But when you leave this culture, like if you go to places like when I lived in France, there was the only television was there was one. I lived in a little small French village, and there was one television in the whole village, and it was in the bar restaurant in town.
Yeah.
And like during that time, I was there when Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh wow. Yeah. Back
And
in
the people that
20.
lived in France, our neighbors, even the 70, 80-year-old people, they rode their bicycles to work.
Yeah.
And the people that could afford to have a car, they might use it once a week. On maybe Sunday, they would
Yeah.
go for a drive in the car.
It
But
was
the other
actually,
days during the week, they would walk and
yeah,
ride their bikes.
yeah. There's
And
another,
even to use the telephone, I would go to the bakery to use the telephone because my father would be at work and we didn't have a telephone in the home. And they were nice enough, if I needed to communicate with my father, I would go to the bakery and use their phone. And
yeah,
then to see what was happening with the John F. Kennedy assassination and the ceremony, everyone in the little village gathered around the
television.
restaurant and were looking through the window at the TV.
Yes.
But it was very refreshing to not be in an environment where everyone had a television and a
Yeah,
telephone.
yeah.
And a lot of the things I noticed living in France, and this was in the 60s, you'd see people on their bicycles and they all had bottles of water. They usually carried water with them,
Yeah.
whether it was Evian or Perrier, water, bottled water was something that people were
Yeah.
using in France decades ago.
Now we have Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid, yes.
There was, back to what you were mentioning, one of the greatest psychologists of all time, but he has lots of books. His name is George Gertner. He wrote a book,
George Gertner.
yeah, Four Arguments at University of Chicago. Four Arguments of Television. How they can cultivate a vision, fixed vision for me, for you, or whoever is glued to it. It tells you what your vision to be.
Yes. So do you have a craving in your life to hear the news or to find out what's going on? How do you use your computer, your laptop?
Sometimes, I hear, but I don't focus in it because there's so much duality in the news. And
Yes.
left doesn't like right, right doesn't like left, so that duality, I try to look at the subjective and polarity news. Let's say I look at the YouTube, for example, it's about health, or it's about, some ways of happiness, or
Right.
something natural stuff, or animals,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're very selective about your intake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just that's what the host theory is about. You don't host negative emotion. If I do, I suffer emotionally and physically. So that's why we have a will to whether, you want to be a host to this kind of emotion, or you don't want to be do I want to be a host and subject to jealousy? Do I want to host and subject to duality, greed, or all of that stuff, that stresses me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I cannot focus on the real work.
So if people are noticing that they haven't been going to work and going out in public, and perhaps people are noticing that their lives they have a calmness to their lives because they're not going out and being stressed out by the usual activities. Although if they're very concerned and watching TV and the news all the time, they're going to be accumulating stress.
But what happened, they have to develop creative, creative ambitions,
Mm-hmm.
creative drive, creative, not critical, because a lot of times news is about criticizing somebody
Mm-hmm.
or criticizing a situation. But creative, if they really focus on creative, all of a sudden their ambition, their motivation, everything gets utilized. And this time, that we have really slowed the velocity of culture, is a good time to contemplate on
Right.
creative issues rather than critical issues. Because critical and analytical focus, it breaks things apart. Creative,
Separation and fragmentation.
creative and symbiotic, it puts things together. That's what the nature is doing. Creation is very creative, symbiotic, and puts the fractalates. But me, I am under stress because all of a sudden I have increased the knob of velocity of culture, and all of a sudden I am under stress because everything is analytical. I take it apart, and sometimes I can't put it back together.
Yes. Well, in our closing moments of our conversation tonight, what points would you like to leave to share at the closing part of our show tonight?
If we have to come with kind of resonance and symbiotism and centropical approach to our field, which is the creation, we have to be more creative, not critical. We have to be more symbiotic than segmentational, separating things. We have to be
Right.
more subjective than objective. And then, we'll be more in resonance with creation and our field, and then we'll have a happier flow.
So utilizing these times of lockdown, what I call in the temples of quarantine, to utilize the quiet stillness
Yeah,
and to be introspective and to
yeah,
ponder. Perhaps you might start knitting or painting or doing
yeah,
something,
yeah,
creating, hopefully people are
yeah,
planting some gardens
yeah,
somewhere in their windowsill, or maybe they have a little space in their yard. They can at
yeah,
least do something
yeah.
creative with this gift of time.
Do some gardening, just whatever creative. It's true that everybody is now, average working class, is suffering economically. It's true that, but through that pain of suffering, maybe some joy of creativity can be extracted and mined.
Well, our beloved Buckminster Fuller had the motto of doing more with less,
Yes, less is more.
and less is more. And the process of this seeing these times that some people think are very hard times as a blessing changes your whole perspective on it.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, behind any glory, there's a hardship. A mother goes through a lot of hardship to have the glory of a child.
Yes. Behind any
It's still
glory,
full.
there's a hardship.
Yeah. Behind any glory, there is a hardship. I mean, if I have to reach the top of this hill, I have to put some effort and pain and muscle, sweat to get on top.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'll be washed off with the whatever the flood flood flow.
And if your outlook on life, how easy is it to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, there's no dead end tunnels. It's all the holes that we have to go through come to opening. Look at, for example, birth. In the birth, a baby all of a sudden, right before it's going to be born, it sees a little tiny light behind the end of the tunnel before it comes out. And then he sees the light and it's
Yes.
born. And everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Go for the light.
So, that, gives us any emotion in life, like a woman goes through labor to have a joy.
Yes. And the dark night of the soul that often many people speak of, we go through these dark nights of the soul, but they lead to enlightenment if we surrender
Yeah.
in submission to serving creator and creation. I've been interviewing people that have very hard experiences, and they all say, well, I surrendered and accepted, and it
Yeah.
allowed me to assimilate
Yes.
and lessen the accumulation of all the
Yeah.
negativity.
Yes. See, the thing is, we have to the nature is probably trying, the pandemic is not a disaster. It's probably, if there's always going to be more pandemic coming up because of the magnetic field of the earth is about to change. The same as when it changed at the time of Prophet Saleh, at the time of Atlantis, same as the Prophet Noah, but it was cleansing. It was a cleansing event.
Yes.
During the Noah, it was a cleansing effect. During Atlantean, it was a cleansing because they had become so insolent and imbecile. So all of a sudden, this was a cleansing, and all of a sudden, a new, better next day. Not until we see the darkness of the night, we cannot really appreciate the glory of the morning light.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So let's send our thoughts and prayers out to people to assimilate and think of what it means to be synergetic and to live in symbiotic harmony with existence.
And also slow down the velocity of life that we have increased it so much.
Yes.
So we be the same velocity as the nature so we can enjoy it.
I forget the song. There's a little song that goes, slow down, you move so fast. Let's
Oh,
make
yeah,
the
yeah.
morning last.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
Well, I sing a song to my grandkids. I don't know why. I started appreciating Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood many years ago.
Yeah.
And I wake up and I say, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
A beautiful day for a neighbor. I
Yeah.
sing it to my kids like, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A
Yeah.
beautiful day for a neighbor. La,
Yeah.
la, la, la.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for many years. Some of the adults, when I wake up in the morning and they're having their first cup of coffee, I come out singing.
Yeah.
But, I call that singing my son song. I think having a son song
Yeah.
in a song in the heart is worth 2 on the charts. You know what I'm saying? People, singers and songwriters want to have a big hit, but the
Yes.
big
Yes.
hit is to whistle while you work
Yes.
and carry a tune, have a little tune in your step,
Yeah.
a lightness
Yeah.
to your walk.
Yeah. A nice pitch and rhythm, all along with a good, nice, beautiful lyrics.
Yes, indeed. My brother, it's been a wonderful conversation once again. I want to say fi until we meet again.
Yes.
So thank
And
you
then
very
bye
much.
to all.
Thank you until we meet again. All right, my brother.
And yes. 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 Bye to all.
All right, bye to all. Blessings. Well, that's it for here and now. But until we meet again, this has been Louis-Virie Blanche thanking you for listening to Conversations with Elders on Glastonbury Radio 432. Bless you.
Quantum physics in the kitchen sink. The energy that follows the thoughts you think. Quantum physics and the cosmic sea. Laws of nature too heavy for me. It's too cosmic, much too cosmic for me. Much too cosmic, much too cosmic.